To put what Nick was talking about in context, let me first take you a little bit through a very brief history of the internet. And you know, the internet is so young, or at least its modern incarnation, that it may not even, you may not think of it having a history, but it's been so much a central part of our life that I bet many of you cannot remember what it was like before we had access to the web. And as you know, the web that most of us have known and used a lot for the last dozen years or so was very much focused on content. You access a website, you read a web page. It has been infinitely useful, but what we realized 5 years later is that Web 1.0 was actually the sort of lonely web. And the reason it was the lonely web is that Web 2.0 brought people into it. So instead of just being one person accessing information, shopping, and doing all these things we continue to do, Web 2.0 became much more of a meeting place where people exchange information with each other, some of it in real time with instant messaging, a lot of it, you write a blog, somebody finds it, reads it, comments on it, MySpace, people collaborate to produce open source code like Linux, to collaborate to produce Wikipedia. So it's become a very sharing, collaborative space, but Web 2.0 has shared something in common with Web 1.0, which is they both have been the text-based web. And I don't need to tell you that there is a lot more to life than the written word, wonderful as the written word is. And that's why we have seen in just the last few years the emergence of this Web 3.0. By the way, there is no agreement on the name Web 3.0, but it fits very nicely with Web 2.0, where there is agreement to the name. And the key characteristic of Web 3.0, which is very much shown by the little clip of Second Life that Nick showed you, is that it's a much more visual and immersive web that not only can you interact with information and can you interact with other people, but you do that in a much more visual way as opposed to the more textual and even just static image way of the previous versions of the web. Now, in Second Life, as in many other virtual worlds, the stuff that you saw is created by the people that use the virtual world. Sometimes it's the users themselves that have the skills to create. Other times, it's somebody else does it for them, whether it's design the buildings or the avatars. So we're even beginning to see the creation of things in the web, which in the previous versions we called programming. This is still programming, but now it's a much more visual, much more experiential type of programming. So why is this a very, very, very big deal to those of us who are in information technology like me? Why are we so excited about this? Well, to look at it, you have to look at the interfaces that we have had for interacting with computers. And today, far and away, the main interface that everybody uses is something called the graphical user interface, or the GUI. That's what pretty much we all use, and even the web browser is a version, oops. Let me go back one slide. Even the web browser is a version of a GUI. Now, the graphical user interface was invented in Xerox PARC in the 1970s. And I know many of you were not born in the 1970s. If you look at the advances in microprocessors, computer memory, and computer storage, bandwidth, since the 1970s, it's probably 6, 7 orders of magnitude. In other words, microprocessors may very well be 1,000,000 times more powerful than they were then. 1,000,000 times more powerful. Storage may very well be 1,000,000 times denser and less expensive than it was then. And we are still using the same bloody user interface to interact with computers that are 100,000 to 1,000,000 times more powerful than we did then. Something is wrong with that picture. And I think that there are a couple of things wrong why this happened. One of them is that to make computers much more visually expressive takes a lot of capacity, a huge amount of capacities. Computers are delighted when all they need to do is show a page on the screen or add and divide numbers. They love those kinds of things. Computers are quote-unquote unhappy, or it takes a huge amount of capacity to do something that's much more visual and creative. So we actually had to wait those 30 years for the technology to catch up. But finally, it has. And the manifestation of the technology catching up has been most expressed by the advent of video games and the